Hi, we're Annie and Christian with Forest of Arden Healing Arts and Yoga Bear Box. And today we are going to be discussing 3 issues with child's pose, also known as Balasana. The first issue is the difference between having the legs close together and wide apart. Second issue is the proximity of the butt to the heels. And the third issue is the width of your mat. Now, as a yoga teacher during COVID time, I spend time reading comments and issues that people have with various poses on Facebook groups and forums. And these issues have been coming up repeatedly, so I wanted to address them. So the first issue is having the legs together versus wide apart. Now, having the legs close together is much more challenging and requires a lot more flexibility in the body. For example, it requires flexibility in the top of the foot, ankle, front of the shin, so the tibialis anterior, flexibility in the knees, quadriceps, and belly space. And for many people, their knees are going to hurt on the mat, and particularly what it is it's the tibial tuberosity. For some people, there's a bony prominence that no matter how much you stretch, it still is going to rub on the floor. So you can use a gardening pad, or you can also use a folded up blanket and put it under your knees, especially if you know you're going to be returning to child's pose often throughout a practice or spending a long time, like a restorative amount of time in a child's pose. You'll notice that Christian's ankles are quite tight for this. His tibialis anterior are quite tight for this. And the knees are tight, hips. And for many people, this position puts the pelvis in a posterior tilt, which for some people can kind of close off the breathing mechanism. It also presses the abdomen up into the diaphragm, making it feel like you can't breathe, and some people feel very claustrophobic in this option. What is the alternative? Knees wide apart. And this changes the whole pose. So the first thing you'll notice is that it changes the pressure on the ankles. It changes the rotation of the thighs, which also changes where the tibial tuberosity hits on the floor. So for some people, they may still need a knee pad, but for some people they may not, because they may be on a different angle of the knee. So I said before, there's now going to be an internal rotation. Can you go forward? An internal rotation of the thighs. And now you'll notice that the pelvis now is in an anterior pelvic tilt, which for some people is going to allow for more space in the abdominal area and is going to allow for more breath to flow through the spine. So in child's pose, why do we come into child's pose? We have to ask that question. Is the goal to make it look like somebody else's pose? Or is it to come back to the breath? Is it a counter pose for, say, something like a back bend, which really amps up the heart rate, gets you into your sympathetic nervous system? Is it a counter pose where we're trying to slow down the heart rate, slow down the breathing, get us reconnected to our breath, and also bring us back into parasympathetic nervous system? The latter is the case. Second issue, the proximity of the butt to the heels. So if we are to look at the first option again, so the knees together again, not only do we have the issue of the posterior pelvic tilt going on, which will throw your center of gravity farther forward. So if you just come in briefly, you notice as he comes forward, that tilt is bringing his center of gravity farther forward. So he's going to have to work extra hard to try to get his sit bones to sink back. Also, sit up. If you are somebody who has curvy features in your body is not going to be able to fold up like a piece of laundry. So what are these curvy areas? You may have curves in your calves, in your hamstrings, the fronts of your thighs, and also in the belly. Curves in any of those and in all of those will make the reach of the sit bones to the heels just not going to happen. And for some of us, it may never happen. You could have a wonderful splits practice and really strong open hips, and it just never happens because of your dimensions. Not to mention the dimensions of your bones to each other. So maybe your shin bones are shorter than your thigh bones, and so your heels are just never going to reach your butt. These are anatomical differences that will make it just simply impossible for many of us to look like the pose in the book. And this is true also for knees wide apart. However, with knees wide apart, the anterior pelvic tilt allows for the center of gravity, you can come down, to maintain a little bit more in the hips. And so he's going to get a lot more benefit from this stretch in the hips, particularly where the sacrum and the hips meet, the SI joints, and also into some of the lower back fascia. And really, he's just going to get a nice elongation in the spine because his center of gravity is still sinking his hips towards his heels, even if his hips may never touch his heels. So really the pose is to stretch the back seam of the body and return back to the breath and kind of quiet the nervous system down. That brings us to our third issue, which is mat size. So when you take your wide knee child's pose, say you were doing it on a standard size yoga mat. So I'm going to roll out my old yoga mat, which I've kept. And if you were somebody who had Christian's size of thigh bones coming into your wide-legged child's pose, you'd be on the hardwood floor. And that's not nice. That doesn't feel good. So this is why we carry wide yoga mats, because we believe that having a yoga mat fit your body is more important than you fitting into the narrow shape of a standard yoga mat.